Fierce as a tiger and strong as a lion, his arms packed with so much power that enemies would lose their breath. The moment his feet hit the battlefield, the enemy's souls would tremble. He was Kayana, son of the great Ahula. The story takes place in the 18th century in the Hawaiian Islands. Back then, there were 4 major kingdoms: Oahu, Maui, Kauai, and Hawaii. They were once united, but greedy chiefs and people worshiping different gods tore them apart. Since then, they've been stuck in an endless cycle of war. Meanwhile, Kayana, the general of the Maui kingdom, had stepped away from the bloodshed and was living a quiet life in Kauai with his family. For food, they hunted giant fish. Everything was going fine until one day the royal messenger of Maui's king, Kahekili, showed up on their island. The king of Kauai didn't want any bloodshed at all. 3 years ago, when Kayana had come to him asking for refuge, he had promised there'd be no trouble with the Maui kingdom. Now it was time to keep that promise. The royal messenger had brought a message from Kahekili. Normally, he would have hunted down and killed his army deserters, but because of the king's orders, Kayana was still standing on his own 2 feet. Kahekili had summoned Kayana to his council the next day. The messenger also warned him that ignoring a royal order meant getting your tongue cut off, and if he ran, they'd find him again. And this time, there'd be no forgiveness. Kayana had 2 brothers, Namake and Nahi. Kayana's wife's name was Kupuohi. Kupuohi's younger sister, Heke, was married to Nahi. The next morning, they left Hek to watch the house and set out for Maui. When they reached the shore, Kahekili's son was already there waiting for them. He took them straight to the king. Kayana's welcome, an attack with a wooden spear. For a runaway general, what better welcome could there be? Between him and Kahekili's council stood a spear fighter known for one thing: no one could get past him to reach the king. Now he was challenging Kayana to step forward. The king wanted the same thing, so Kayana took off his feather cloak and dodged the man's spear before charging at him. The two fought hard, and in the end, Kayana took him down. Then he bowed to the king and presented a gift. The king accepted it and wanted Kayana to take back his old position, but Kayana politely refused. That's when the king reminded him that his father, Kahekili's cousin, had served him till his last breath. That same passion and fighting skill were in Kayana too, but he had walked away in the middle of it all. A council meeting was held, where Kayana asked why they'd called him here. The problem was, their kingdom was in serious danger. Spies had reported that Oahu's young king, Hahana, was planning an attack. He had an army twice the size of Maui's. Maui's prophets had also made things worse by predicting that their people would end up as slaves under Oahu's rule. But Kayana's brother Namake couldn't figure out why King Hahana would attack them. He had always sworn loyalty to Kahekili and was even his admirer. That's when Kahekili's son, Prince Kupule, explained that Oahu's high priest was a dangerous man who had poisoned the young king's mind. Either way, Kayana was done with bloodshed and refused to fight in this war. Still, the king told him to stay the night and think it over. This caused tension between the brothers, because they had once left his army and challenged him before. This time, he wouldn't let them live. Kayana told them, "I'll never fight again for that misguided king who caused the death of thousands of innocent people. Tomorrow morning, we head back to Kauai." The next morning, Kayana woke up to find King Kahekili himself coming to see him, completely alone. Why would he fear Kayana? He was family. He took Kayana to the resting place of his father's bones, bones that had been dishonored by Oahu's soldiers. Seeing this, Kayana's eyes filled with tears. Turns out, Oahu's high priest had asked for the bones of an enemy chief to sacrifice on the war altar. Kahekili's soldiers tried to stop him, but by the time they got there, the bones had already been disrespected. Here the king also mentioned an old prophecy that said, "A star wearing the feather cloak will signal the rise of a great king who will unite all 4 kingdoms." They had waited for generations, and finally that star appeared, the night Kayana was born. They waited for years, but no such king showed up. Now Kahekili believed Kayana was that star in the feather cloak, and Kahekili himself was the king who would unite the 4 kingdoms. That day, Kayana and his brothers laid their father's bones to rest and swore that the priest would pay for it. Kayana had a strategy to take Oahu with very little bloodshed. The plan was to move the king's army near their shore, so Oahu's army would panic and gather to defend the coast, but they wouldn't attack. Meanwhile, Kayana would hit the eastern fort and capture the priest. Once the temple was taken, the young king would surrender. It was a solid plan, so they set out for war. One of Kayana's units attacked the eastern fort. The enemy came out to fight, and soon the shore turned into a battlefield. Spears rained down, slingshots fired. The fight raged on both sides, and in the end, Kayana's forces took the coast. Now it was time to grab the priest, but before the temple was a forest where enemies were hiding in the grass. They suddenly attacked, but were handled. Some were hiding in the trees too, and they were taken out one by one. In that same grass, they found a woman hiding with her kids. Kayana ignored them. He didn't kill innocent people. That's when Namake noticed her wooden spear. Turns out it wasn't a spear at all, but a farming tool. They weren't warriors. They were farmers. By the time they realized the mistake, it was too late. The king, drunk on his own glory, set foot on the coast and ran straight toward a child. This was the kind of stupidity that had made Kayana leave his army before. And it didn't stop there. He ordered everyone in the temple to be killed, even though it was a place of refuge, filled not with warriors but with refugees. By the time Kayana and the others ran to the temple, bodies were everywhere. The young king Hahana was already captured. Before dying, he told the king, "I wanted to be a great king like you and had sworn loyalty to you. Then why did you attack my kingdom?" Instead of answering, Kahekili killed him. Once again, Kayana had made a huge mistake. Kahekili had even lied to his own son Kupule, saying Oahu was going to attack them, when the truth was something else. Even the story about his father's bones being disrespected was a lie. That night, Kayana swore he would never lead Kahekili's army again, even if it cost him his life. He was planning to escape with his family, but they were being closely watched. On the other side, King Kahekili's sister had her own issues. She lived apart from him, on Maui's Kaupo coast. There was a big reason for that. On that coast, some locals spotted a canoe from the Hawaii kingdom. Before they could react, Hawaii's warriors killed them. It was some chief from Hawaii who had come to take his daughter Kahumanu. He went to meet Kahekili's sister, who was his wife, and told her that Kahekili had attacked Oahu without reason, so war was about to break out on their islands. Soon, travel to and from Maui's shores would be shut down. Before that happened, he had come to take them back to the Hawaii kingdom, but Kayahumanu's mother refused to leave. She didn't want to abandon her homeland, and on top of that, she was Kahekili's sister. Either way, the Hawaii kingdom folks wouldn't accept her. But Moku had a plan. He had already arranged for his daughter Kahumanu to marry a chief from Hawaii who would help them settle there. But just like her mother, Kahumanu didn't want to go. Staying here too long wasn't safe for Moku. That's when his wife assured him, "You go, I'll convince Kahumanu and send her." After that, Moku headed back to Hawaii. Meanwhile, over in Oahu, bodies were piling up. Prince Kupule was also upset with his father for what he had done. But Kahekili wasn't going to stop until he made that prophecy come true. Kayana's family was just waiting for the right moment. Then the king sent word for Kayana to come to the temple. Before going, he told his brothers what they had to do next. The royal messenger escorted him to the temple and went to call the king. By the time the king showed up, everything had changed. The guards had been killed and Kayana and his family were gone. Seeing the dead guards, the king lost it and ordered them to search all 8 seas. But with the messenger around, they didn't need to waste time wandering. He knew Kayana's wife Kupuohi's sister Heka was in Maui, so they must have gone to get her. This time the king wasn't showing any mercy. He wanted Kayana killed and his bones brought back, because all he cared about was the power in those bones. Back then, people believed a warrior's strength was stored in his bones. If they took too long, it could take years to track him down again. So they headed for Maui as fast as possible. Meanwhile, the ocean had turned vicious. Kayana and his brothers rowed hard, because stopping meant dying. Then in a flash of lightning, a huge ship appeared. After braving the deadly weather, Kayana and his family finally reached home. But Heke wasn't there. Seeing her things, they guessed she might be in the valley. By then, Prince Kupule had landed on the shore with his whole crew. Moments later, Kayana heard someone behind him. When he turned, one of Kupule's men was there. The man shouted for his people, but Kayana silenced him in a second. By then, though, his voice had already been heard. Soon, Kupule's whole crew was chasing Kayana. He led them away from his family so they could get to safety. But now he didn't want to run. He wanted to help Kayana. Kupuohi, though, used her head and went to find Heke instead, because if they went into the fight, they'd be dead. Kayana kept running until he vanished from the enemy's sight. They had no idea where he went, so they split up into 2 groups. Elsewhere, that massive British ship had reached Maui's shore. The sailors on board were starving and thirsty after getting lost in a storm and burning through more supplies than they could afford. Without food or water, they'd die at sea anyway, so they risked landing on dangerous Maui, knowing full well what happened years ago when Captain Cook came here. Meanwhile, after a lot of convincing, Kaahumanu finally agreed to marry the Hawaii chief, figuring it was better than hiding from her grandfather forever. Over in the valley, Heki was humming a song while planting turmeric when her sister showed up to get her and explained the whole situation. Kayana's enemies had already found him, and now only a short distance remained between them. That's when one of them fired a slingshot from far away, hitting him in the head. He went down, but luckily there were tall grasses where he could hide. Crawling through the grass, he came across a wild pig, and a little further, its baby grazing nearby. Kayana grabbed the piglet and quickly tossed it toward the enemies, making the mother pig charge at them in fury. It created a distraction, and Kayana used it to slip away. Later, he came across a cave where there was a beautiful girl, Kaahumanu. Seeing Kayana hurt, she reached out to help, but he refused, saying the king's men were after him, and if she helped, they'd kill her too. But Kaahumanu didn't back off and took him to a spot where the king's men could never find him. As soon as he got some rest, he passed out. Meanwhile, Prince Kupule's men were worn out from searching for Kayana, but still weren't ready to give up. A few hours later, when Kayana woke up, Kaahumanu asked him a few questions, like why the king's men were after him and why he had the royal family's emblem on his arm. Then Kayana told her the whole story and asked, "Who are you to know about the royal emblem?" Kaahumanu told him she was the daughter of King Kahekili's sister, but Kayana didn't believe her because he knew everyone from the royal family well. Then Kaahumanu told him she was born in a cave like this and had been hiding from her grandfather since she was a kid. Turns out, her mom had married a chief from the rival Hawaii kingdom for love. If King Kahekili found out, he would have had them killed. That's why she was still living and hiding inside a cave. After spending 24 hours there, when Kayana was feeling a little better, he was about to go look for his family. That's when Kaahumanu said, "There's a boat waiting to take me to Hawaii. If you want, your family can take shelter in Hawaii with me." So they headed toward the valley. On the same path, British sailors were gathering fruits, water, and stuff. That's when one of their men, who had gone a bit far to relieve himself, got ambushed by Prince Kupule's men. They knocked him out and took his pistol. Meanwhile, Kayana ran into the British sailors. A sailor named Marley immediately pointed a gun at Kayana. The captain ordered him to lower it, but Marley was stubborn. By now, Kaahumanu had figured out they were in trouble and had come looking for food and water. Kayana said sarcastically, "Then why's that rat-faced guy pointing a stick at me?" As soon as he picked up a knife, Marley pulled the trigger. But thanks to the captain stepping in at the last second, the shot missed. That one mistake put the whole island after them. Now there was only one way: get out of here fast. But before they could move, one of Kupule's men showed up from behind. Without wasting a second, Kayana threw his knife and took him out. Seeing John's pistol on him, the British sailors ran off. On the other side, Prince Kupule was running toward the sound of gunfire. He could get there any moment, so Kayana gave Kaahumanu a token of his and said, "In the valley near the fields, my family will be waiting for me. Give this to my wife Kupuohi. She'll understand everything." If Kayana didn't do this, Prince Kupule would reach the shore, and then no one would be able to escape. Meanwhile, Nahi's patience had snapped. He was desperate to go find Kayana, but his younger brother wouldn't let him, and the two ended up in a fight. It even got to the point where Kupuohi held a knife to Nahi's neck. Just then, Kaahumanu showed up. She handed over Kayana's token and explained the whole thing. Kupuohi was sure Kayana would find them, so they agreed to go to Hawaii. As they were getting on the boat, they came across a British sailor who had been separated from his crew. Kaahumanu took him along, while on the other side, the captain boarded the boat after waiting for him. Meanwhile, Kayana had lured the enemies far from the shore. Running and running, he ran out of land. Now with Prince Kupule's men on one side and a cliff on the other. Then came the big fight. Dozens went at one man, but taking down the brutal Kayana wasn't that easy. Anyone who got close, he tore apart. After a lot of struggle, they finally got him on his knees, and just when the king's messenger was about to finish him, Kayana struck back again. Using the messenger as a shield, he jumped into the cliff. This place was so high up, there was no chance of surviving the fall. So Prince Kupule ordered to find the body. When Kayana opened his eyes, he was on a British ship. He went wild there. Controlling a man built like a beast wasn't easy for them. Kayana ran straight to the deck and saw they were far from Maui Island. The captain gave him back his stuff and said if they hadn't helped, he'd be dead. "One time you saved our life, one time we saved yours. Now we're even." Now it was up to Kayana if he wanted to stay with them, or they could drop him somewhere. 1 year later, somewhere in Alaska. Over that year, Tony and Kayana had become good friends. Tony taught him about gun parts every day and helped him learn English. Soon he learned to shoot and hunt. Meanwhile, his whole family had built a home on some shore in Hawaii. John was with them, teaching the local kids English. Kupuohi stayed sad, but deep down she had hope Kaiana would come back one day. On the other side, Maui's kingdom was getting stronger. After that fight, many chiefs from Oahu had bowed down to King Kahekili, but some rebel chiefs were plotting to kill Kahekili. One of them was Hekuhoku, a descendant of the great Kakuhihewa. He sent his spy to poison Kahekili, but the spy got caught, and Hekuhoku's secret was out. Soon the king's men surrounded him, but Hekuhoku wasn't ready to kneel. When he saw his family in danger, he swore loyalty to the king, but the king spared no one and made him drink his own poison. Stories of Kahekili's cruelty reached the king of Hawaii. The king was near death and wanted to know what his chief's strategy would be if they were attacked. Would they support their new king after his death? Kamehameha agreed and said when the king's son Keoa takes the throne, they'll stand by him and crush that crazy king's head. Meanwhile, Chief Moku's daughter Kahumanu had learned a good amount of English from John over the past year. Then came the day she was married off to Chief Kamehameha. On the other side, Kaiana had decided to return to his family. Zamboanga was his last trade stop, after which the captain had promised to take him to Maui. Marley still couldn't understand why the captain pulled him out of the water and onto the ship. He believed if those islanders had the chance, they would have killed him. If Marley was the captain, he'd have killed him long ago. This led to an argument between him and Tony, which was going to have deadly consequences later. 2 days later, they reached the shores of the Spanish East Indies in Zamboanga. Kaiana had saved up a lot of money working on the ship. He was going to buy guns, and a lot of them. But it didn't work out because they weren't just going to sell a whole battalion's worth of guns to anyone. A woman had been watching all this. She started following him. Tony went off to have fun, and that's when a drunk guy tried to mess with Kaiana. Before he could, Kaiana slammed him down. Seeing the moment, the unknown woman approached Kaiana. Then she asked curiously, "What's a chief from Maui doing here?" Kaiana was surprised how she even knew him. Her name was Wenai, and she had left Hawaii many years ago. Here she had connections with some gun smugglers who could get Kaiana as many guns as he wanted. But for that, Kaiana had to do her a favor. She wanted to meet their captain. She had an amazing master plan that could make them filthy rich, trading sandalwood. This wood was so rare that in China and Europe, it could be sold for 5 times its price. As for sandalwood, the mountains of the Hawaiian Islands were full of it. If Kaiana could convince the local chiefs to trade sandalwood, they could become richer than anyone could imagine. The captain liked her idea, but they only had one ship. How could they compete with the East India Company? Wenai had thought of that too. East India didn't know where their small islands were, so they could trade without getting noticed. But Kaiana didn't agree because he didn't want white men setting foot on his shores at any cost. Still, Wenai didn't give up and took him to the market to show him some slaves. These people were once locals here, but then the Spanish came and took everything from them. The day wasn't far when they'd find the Hawaiian Islands too. Then they'd trade sandalwood and make the locals their slaves. Because against guns, their wooden spears would be useless. The only way to stop this was to take control of the trade before it was too late, so they could make money and buy weapons to protect their islands. The next morning, Marley met a captain. The captain thought he came asking for work, but Marley dropped a bomb. There are islands in the Pacific Ocean where no Christian has ever set foot. Whoever takes them will control the sea routes from Alaska to Canton. That night, Marley sent a courtesan after his ship's captain, so he'd stay busy with her. Meanwhile, Tony's eyes were on Marley the whole time. He sent something off and followed Marley onto his ship. There he saw a map spread out on the captain's table, marking all the Hawaiian Islands. Realizing the danger, he pointed a gun at Marley. But he wasn't alone. Someone came up from behind and put a gun to Tony's head. Then Marley let out all his built-up anger on him. But they couldn't kill him. He was too valuable for them. They knocked him out and took him away. In the meantime, Marley stole the map.
At dawn, when Tony didn't show up on the ship, Kaiana made the risk choice to face Vinay alone. Their deal was still in place. Vinay had stacked up the weapons, but when it came to Tony, he shrugged, acting like he couldn't care less. Back at the docks, Kaiana pressed Marley for answers, only to be fed a blatant lie. Marley swore he hadn't seen Tony since last night, even though he was the very one who had him taken. The clock was ticking. They had to leave by nightfall. But Kaiana refused to quit. He scoured the city until he stumbled on a row of cages, human lives locked up like animals. That sight lit a fire in him. He snapped, lashing out at the slave master, until soldiers poured in, forcing him to fight his way out. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, Hawaii was holding its breath. After the king's death, his son Keoa was crowned without resistance, 8 districts nodding in agreement. But the true blow came with the late king's final decree. The war god wouldn't be handed to Keoa. but to Kamehameha, the bastard son, the one everyone knew was born for battle. That single act carved a wound in Kiowa's pride. Furious, he ripped out one of his own teeth, desperate to prove he was still a warrior. But tradition was law. Whoever held the war god led the armies, and Kamehameha wasn't about to let that honor slip. That's where the seeds of their rivalry were planted. Back on the Zamboanga coast, Spanish soldiers were tightening the noose, interrogating Kayana's captain for answers. Vene passed word. If they didn't get the cargo loaded now, the entire deal was dead. But Kayana wasn't wired that way. Tony was his brother-in-arms, and he wasn't about to sail without him. He tore through the port like a storm, cutting down guards, ripping open cages, setting the slaves free one by one. Back on the ship, cannons and muskets were being loaded in a frenzy, but the captain still held the anchor, buying Kayana a few more minutes. Finally, after blood and sweat, he found Tony, drugged, barely able to stand, but alive. And in that same chaos, Kayana spotted Marley slipping into the shadows, running for his life. He let him go. All that mattered was getting Tony back safe. Together, they vanished into the sea, leaving Zamboanga behind. When Kayana finally set foot back home, joy crashed over him. But what he didn't know was that his wife Kupuohi, his family, had already buried him in their hearts. He'd been gone for over 2 years. In that time, she and Namaki had grown close, believing Kayana was never coming back. His return hit them like a miracle, but Hawaii had changed. Politics were tearing it apart. Moku, Kamehameha's right hand, showed up at the docks the moment Kayana arrived, demanding answers. Foreigners weren't welcome here, not unless Kamehameha himself approved. Kayana spun his story, framing the traders as allies, not invaders. Moku let them stay on the ship for now, but the decision was Kamehameha's to make. Reunited with his family, Kayana finally breathed easy. But reality set in quick. Hawaii was split down the middle. His bloodline backed Kamehameha, while Keoa nursed his rage. Kayana warned them all. Kahekili was circling, waiting to strike when they were divided. In the council, there was no room for common men, so his pleas barely made it to the ears of power. Still, his words carried weight, because deep down, everyone knew the storm was already on its way. All this time, Queen Kaahumanu had been watching closely, and deep down, she trusted Kayana's instincts. Without hesitation, she led him straight to her husband, Kamehameha. But the first sight threw Kayana off balance. This so-called leader wasn't sitting on a throne draped in gold. He was knee-deep in the fields, working the earth with his own hands. Kayana couldn't wrap his head around why the late king had passed the war god not to Keoa, a proven warrior, but to a man who looked more like a farmer than a general. Still, he laid it out plain. Hawaii was sitting on a powder keg, and an attack was coming. Kamehameha barely blinked. Instead of answering, he tossed a challenge Kayana's way. Win, and he'd earn a seat at the royal council, a voice in the future of the kingdom. Lose, and he'd stay silent forever. Kayana didn't flinch. The test was brutal, a race where one mistake meant hitting the dirt. Within seconds, his brothers crashed out. Kayana held on, pushing through every stumble, every near fall, until against all odds, he crossed the line. Kamehameha hadn't believed for a second he could pull it off, but the result was undeniable. Kayana had earned his place among the king's council. Meanwhile, across the islands, the king of Maui was spiraling into madness. Obsessed with a prophecy that spoke of uniting all 4 kingdoms, he unleashed unspeakable cruelty, slaughtering rivals and using their bones to build a towering temple to his own ego. Chiefs from Oahu, Maui, and Kauai who dared defy him were broken, paraded as example. His descent into insanity was so complete, his own people sought healers to tame the rage that consumed him. Back on Hawaii, Kayana was training men on the new muskets he'd smuggled in, turning farmers into fighters. At the same time, he and Kupuohi carried a fragile peace offering to Keoa. She had family ties to him and hoped blood would speak louder than pride. Her plea was simple: unite before Kekili makes his move, because divided, Hawaii wouldn't stand a chance. But Keoa's answer was ice cold. Until the war god was returned, until Kamehameha was dead, there would be no peace. His rage spilled into the open. He'd kill his cousin, reclaim the war god, and only then talk about unity. That's when Kayana snapped, gun drawn. The tension so thick one spark could have set off a massacre. It was Kupuohi who cut through the madness, stepping in before blood was spilled. But the writing was on the wall. The clash between Keoa and Kamehameha wasn't if, it was when. Keoa, restless and boiling with anger, tested his strength and then did something reckless. He walked straight into Kahekili's camp. The Maui king, brutal and cunning, was caught off guard. Here was the son of a rival king, unarmed, standing before him. Keoa laid it out. His own cousin wanted to steal the throne, and he needed Kahekili's help to stop him. The older king tilted the balance, asking, "What's in it for me?" Keoa didn't flinch. He promised peace for the people of Hawaii, if only Kahekili would back him. That was enough. Kahekili agreed, and unleashed one of his most feared commanders, Oponui, a man whispered about for his lack of mercy. But as alliances shifted, another storm was brewing. Foreign ships touched Hawaiian shores, guided by none other than Marley. The moment their anchors hit, axes came down on sandalwood trees, stripping the land. When a young boy stumbled on them, Marley didn't hesitate. He leveled a gun at the child, desperate to silence him before word spread to the chiefs. The boy ran, heart pounding, until suddenly he stopped. It wasn't fear, it was a trap. Hidden among the jungle, his people emerged one by one, surrounding the intruder. And soon after, word reached Kaiana. A foreign ship had been captured, and Marley was on it. Chief Kamehameha finally stood face to face with Captain Metcalf, pressing him for answers. The captain played it cool, claiming he was nothing more than a simple trader, no harm intended, no conquest in mind. But nobody in Hawaii was naive enough to just swallow a foreigner's words. Even so, Kamehameha gave him the courtesy of a guest, safe from attack, but confined to his ship until the council decided their fate. Behind closed doors, he leaned on Kaiana, the one man who'd seen the outside world, for counsel. Kaiana didn't hesitate. These men weren't to be trusted. He reminded everyone how they'd once tried to enslave Tony, how he himself had pulled him from their chain. And he drew from history, invoking the memory of Captain Cook, the first foreigner who had dared set foot on Hawaiian soil, and how Kamehameha's own uncle had cut him down as a warning to the world. To Kaiana, the answer was simple: repeat the lesson. But Kamehameha wasn't swayed. No blood had been spilled yet, no law broken. He wanted Hawaii to be known as a land of peace, not savagery. Kaiana couldn't openly defy him, but his rage boiled over into a plan of his own. In the dead of night, he slipped aboard with Tony and Nahi, silently knocking out guards, storming the deck until he had Marley by the throat. But before he could pull the trigger, Kamehameha himself appeared. Someone had tipped him off. The chief's warning was sharp: cross this line, and you'll pay with your life. Kaiana shot back that whatever happened next wasn't on his conscience, then stormed off into the night, burning with fury. That same evening, the council made its call. The foreigners would be sent home. No cruelty, no punishment. They'd be fed, watered, and escorted to their ship. But anyone caught breaking this order would pay with death. By sunrise, John Young was already relaying the decision. Metcalf exploded, snarling about riches buried in these islands, warning that once word got out, treasure seekers would swarm Hawaii like locusts. His solution? Carve it up, share the spoils, keep the peace. Young didn't even flinch. Rejected and humiliated, Metcalf turned his ship toward another bay, seething. And by sheer chance, Kaiana and Kahumanu spotted the looming danger and sprinted to warn the chiefs. But it was too late. On that shore, families lived, children played. Vinay's home sat among them. The massive ship rolled in like a predator, and the people rushed to the beach, curious, unsuspecting. Metcalf had already loaded his cannons with nails packed into cartridges, a weapon of pure cruelty. His men lit the fuses, and hell ripped open. Explosions tore through the crowd. Men, women, and children were shredded where they stood. They had no time to run. By the time the smoke cleared, nearly 240 lay dead, the rest broken and bleeding. And Metcalf wasn't done. He dragged Marley to the rail, accusing him of wasting his time and money, then shoved him off at gunpoint into the ocean. Only then did he flee, vanishing from Hawaii's horizon. The aftermath was chaos. Kaiana stormed the council in rage, the chamber erupting into shouts and near violence. But nothing could undo the slaughter. Nahi and his wife Heke, like so many others, were paralyzed by grief, unable to shake the horror. And before they could even catch their breath, another nightmare walked in. Opo'unui, Kakile's ruthless hound, stormed the gardens with his men, closing in on them with no mercy in his eyes. They dragged them before Kiowa, but in that very moment, Nahi lunged at him, hammering blow after blow until the warlord staggered. Heke bolted, desperate to find help, yet Kiowa's men intercepted her before she could escape. What followed was a brutal clash between Nahi and Kiowa, a fight that was over before it truly began. Every strike, every desperate move from Nahi was crushed under Kiowa's sheer dominance. And then, with one merciless twist, Kiowa snapped his neck. Heke was seized as well, forced to watch her husband executed right in front of her. Kiowa's forces used her as a living message of war. But before releasing her, Opunui defiled her in the most horrific way. Shattered and broken, she somehow crawled back home. When Kaiana and Namake learned what had happened, they armed themselves and raced to save Nahi. But they were too late. That very night, Nahi's body was laid to rest. And over the flames, Kaiana swore he would avenge his brother, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, Kiowa prepared for battle with blood rituals of his own, sacrificing one of his men by throwing him into a raging pit of lava. He believed victory demanded nothing less. At dawn, word of Nahi's death reached Kamehameha, and the news shook him to his core. Across the Black Desert, Kiowa's army was gathering strength, bolstered by the mighty warriors of Maui. As a reigning chief, he already commanded 5 of the 8 districts, tipping the scales heavily in his favor. For the first time, Kamehameha made a choice he had long resisted. He would embrace foreign weapons. And then, he handed over command of his army to Kayana, the seasoned strategist who had once led forces under Kaikili. Both sides braced for the storm ahead. Just then, the volcano erupted, lava and ash spewing like an omen from the gods. Many took it as a sign that the war deity favored Kiowa. The effect was immediate. Another chief abandoned Kamehameha to side with Kiowa. It was a betrayal that could not have come at a worse time. Kamehameha responded with resolve. He convened his council, declared that the attack would come the next day, and in a striking move, elevated his wife Kaahumanu to the council as well, so that if he fell in battle, she would carry his legacy forward. The council agreed, but Namake couldn't bury his guilt. Before marching, he confessed to Kayana the betrayal he had once committed against his brother. Kayana looked him in the eyes and told him, "You didn't wrong the dead, but destiny wasn't about to bend for anyone's regrets." Kahumanu, who had long been drawn to Kayana, could only watch as fate carved its path. Morning came, and the air trembled with war drums. Warriors stood tall, weapons gleaming, eyes burning with resolve. The chief stepped forward, his voice thundering across the ranks. "Today, our blades will carve history." With that, the army surged toward the Black Desert, where Kiowa's forces waited, already poised for slaughter. The earth quaked as the volcano roared again, fire and smoke boiling into the sky, but not a single soldier flinched. Not even the end of the world could turn them back now. Then, Opunui stepped forward, his voice like a blade cutting through the chaos. "Fools!" he bellowed. "You dare stand against us? For your pitiful chief, you're nothing but dead men walking." His soldiers howled, their chants echoing like thunder. Kayana strode forward in answer, roaring back, "If any of you have the guts, throw your spears at me." A unit broke ranks, spears flying in a deadly storm, but Kayana dodged each one with almost inhuman precision. When the last spear cut through the air, he caught it barehanded, raised it high, and laughed. "Your weapons are soft, weak, just like you." That taunt was all it took. The desert exploded into war. Kayana's army held their ground, a tight knot of steel and sweat. And as they closed in, the gunmen ripped through Kiowa's ranks like a scythe through wheat. Another battalion tried to flank them, but the outcome was the same. Chaos and carnage swallowed them whole. Then, with a coordinated surge, Kayana's warriors charged, spears raining down like a storm of death. The Black Desert transformed into a theater of war, a living, breathing nightmare. Though outnumbered, every soldier in Kayana's ranks fought like a hurricane. One man alone could hold off 4 or 5 enemies, each move precise, lethal. Guns added a deadly rhythm to the chaos. Step wrong, and you were done. Opponents fell one by one under Kayana's relentless strategy, and even Opunui, feared across islands, found no answer for their tactics. Meanwhile, Chief Kamehameha arrived on the field, a storm incarnate, and wreaked havoc with sword and gun alike. Kahumanu, fierce and unflinching, took down enemies with a deadly mix of spear throws and rifle fire. Kayana cut through the opposition, silencing the enemy priest by ripping out his tongue, and then fixed his eyes on Kiowa. But reaching him was another story, surrounded by a ring of soldiers like a lion trapped in a pen. Elsewhere, Heke, driven by vengeance and grief, tried to reach Opunui, but each strike failed, and she teetered on the edge of death. At the critical moment, Kahumanu swooped in from a distance, her shot shattering Okunui's knee, giving Heke the opening to finish him with savage precision. The tide had turned. Kamehameha's forces now pressed forward with unstoppable momentum. Yet Kiowa still had another massive army in reserve, ready to strike once exhaustion set in. Fate intervened. The volcano erupted with monstrous fury, rivers of lava surging across the battlefield, swallowing Kiowa's forces whole. Amid the chaos, Kiowa prayed to the gods, begging for justice. But it was too late. Kayana fought through the inferno and reached him, only to witness him swept into the molten river, meeting his end in fiery oblivion. History was carved that day. Kamehameha emerged victorious, the desert a silent witness to the annihilation. Across the waves, word reached King Kahekili, who immediately began mobilizing his forces for revenge. And that, my friends, is the story of the Chief of War, an epic saga of strategy, courage, and unflinching resolve, where every choice could mean life or death, and legends were forged in fire and blood.